We just over the last few minutes literally shot out a boat, a drug-carrying boat. A lot of drugs in that boat, at exactly 2:48 a.m. in the Caribbean. Darkness, 98 high-speed boats surged from the reef corridor engines screaming like a predator pack on the move. They believed they were invisible, slipping toward U.S. waters unchallenged. What they did not know was that as they crossed the narrowing sea strip, they sailed straight into a trap, a meticulously prepared maritime kill box set by U.S. naval forces. Aboard the surface ship, a team of Navy SEALs held their breath. Above them, a P-8 Poseidon's radar scanned the movement with surgical precision. Why did so many boats appear at once? Who allowed such a fleet to approach the American littoral? And how did U.S. forces anticipate the move so precisely? The answers lie in the shadows of a $100 million cocaine empire run by the cartel known as La Corona del Mar. This was not a mere smuggling run. It was a full-scale naval-style operation, and the U.S. strategy was to stop it at sea before it could reach our shores. If you are intrigued by covert operations at sea, fast-paced tracking, and the hidden web of the drug war, hit subscribe to Titan Navy now, because what unfolds next will change how you view naval interdiction forever. Hours before the ambush detonates in the Caribbean kill box, the story really begins with a faint, ugly blur on a radar screen. Far out over the water, a maritime patrol aircraft switches to synthetic aperture radar, and suddenly, the ocean is no longer just waves. It becomes a detailed map of moving shapes. Among the normal traffic operators, notice a long, thin smear of returns sitting dozens of nautical miles off the main shipping lanes. It does not look like a single cargo ship or a classic ghost boat. Instead, it looks like a cluster of many small targets flying in close formation. For analysts, that instantly feels wrong. Synthetic aperture radar, which acts like a giant scanner from the sky, can pick up small, fast objects even in rough seas. So when that smear refuses to break apart into individual contacts, they know something is hiding there. In recent years, the U.S. Coast Guard and its partners have seen cartels push the limits at sea, seizing loads of 6,000 pounds of cocaine or more in single interdictions across the Caribbean, with values running into hundreds of millions of dollars. Those cases prove one thing: the days of small random runs are over. This time, what appears on the screen is even more aggressive. As the aircraft circles and updates the picture, the smear begins to resolve into a wedge like an arrowhead cutting toward the north. There are too many hulls moving too tight, at too even a speed, to be normal fishing traffic. When the track is relayed to the Joint Operations Center, FBI analysts and Coast Guard officers see the same pattern. This is not a handful of smugglers gambling on a lucky night. It is a mass deployment, a swarm built to overwhelm any single patrol cutter. That formation changes everything because it bends the normal rules of detection at sea. One or two speedboats can be chased, forced to stop, even sunk if they refuse. A formation that behaves like a mechanized unit on water is different. It can scatter, sacrifice a few boats, and still push most of the cargo through. Quietly, planners accept a hard truth: chasing each contact is impossible. The only way to win is to make the entire formation sail into a prepared trap. Yet even this strange radar picture is only the surface. Behind that wedge of boats lies a cartel that has spent years studying sensors, patrol routes, and weak points in U.S. coverage. And the fleet now moving through the dark is only the first clear sign that their new method is finally in play. But if the radar revealed only the shape of the threat, then who created a fleet that could move like a naval unit while staying hidden in plain sight? La Corona del Mar does not look like a cartel when you first study its pattern. It looks like a small private navy. On paper, it barely exists, just a trail of shell companies and offshore accounts. But in satellite images and radar tracks, it appears as a disciplined fleet. Intelligence officers describe a group that learned from every failed run in the Caribbean and Atlantic, watching how the U.S. Coast Guard and Navy moved, then redesigning its own vessels to slip between those patrol lines. Over the last decade, real cartels have already pushed into high-speed maritime tactics, swapping slow fishing boats for fast, go-fast craft powered by heavy outboards, a trend documented by the Coast Guard itself, as seizures of cocaine at sea hit record levels. La Corona del Mar simply takes that logic to the extreme. Instead of a few boats, this network invests in waves of 80 to 100 ultralight speedboats at a time. Each one is built on a composite hull, a mix of fiber-reinforced plastics and other materials that are strong but very light. In naval construction, these composites are valued because they reduce weight and maintenance. Yet they also tend to reflect less radar energy than thick metal plates, shrinking the vessel's radar footprint. For a cartel engineer, that is a gift. It means a small, dark hull can slice across the surface and from far away look like nothing more than sea clutter on a screen. La Corona del Mar turns those advantages into a playbook. Boats are launched from hidden coves and improvised yards along remote coasts, often at night or just before dawn, when sea and air temperatures confuse sensors. Instead of sending one risky shipment, the organization floods a corridor with dozens of nearly identical hulls. From above, that mass breaks into layered wedges like armored columns on water, each line slightly offset to mask the next. Intelligence from real cases shows that when smugglers push large amounts of cocaine by sea, they can move several thousand pounds in a single run. And law enforcement has responded with huge interdictions, such as the joint British and U.S. operation in the Caribbean that pulled about 6,000 pounds of cocaine off a single high-speed boat. La Corona del Mar scales that idea up, betting that quantity and formation will overwhelm any one ship. From the U.S. point of view, that is the real danger. Traditional strategy assumes a patrol detects one suspicious boat, gives chase, and forces it to stop, surrender, or dump the load. However, when a formation behaves like a mechanized unit, every decision becomes harder. If a cutter locks onto one target, 10 others can fan out. If a helicopter drops low to mark a lead boat, the rest can scatter into shoals and reefs. Reports from recent U.S. operations make clear that, even with drones, patrol aircraft, and modern cutters, crews are already working at the edge of what they can cover as they face more and more fast boats and even narco subs in the same waters against a cartel that deliberately designs for mass and speed. Simply chasing contacts turns into a losing game. This is why inside planning rooms, analysts talk about La Corona del Mar not as a gang, but as an adversary that studies radar diagrams and patrol schedules the way a navy studies enemy fleets. Each new composite hull is another piece in a private armada. Each synchronized launch is a rehearsal in how to punch through a coastal shield and land millions of dollars in drugs on foreign shores. As this picture comes into focus, one conclusion overshadows the rest. If U.S. forces try to hunt every single boat, they will always be one step behind. The only realistic way to beat a fleet built on speed and numbers is to make that entire fleet sail into a space where it cannot hide, cannot scatter, and cannot turn back a trap so tight that all 98 boats are caught inside it at once. So if chasing this private navy is impossible, what kind of battlefield could the United States create to trap 98 boats moving at full speed? Long before the first shot is fired, the real battle moves to a map. In a dim operations room, U.S. Navy planners study the coastline and reefs like a puzzle, searching for one place where speed stops being an advantage. They find it in a narrow reef corridor, only about 14 nautical miles across, squeezed between two jagged lines of shallow water and crossed by awkward side currents. In open sea, a Cartel Speedboat can run split or circle back. Inside this corridor, the captain has almost no choices. If he tries to turn hard, the hull risks slamming into coral. If he slows too much, the current begins to push the boat sideways. The same water that once hid smugglers now becomes the walls of their prison. The idea of using geography against traffickers is not fantasy. For years, U.S. forces in the Caribbean have relied on choke points and reef lines to detect and intercept fast drug boats, because the region is full of narrow passages that funnel maritime traffic into predictable lanes, something Coast Guard commanders have openly described when explaining major cocaine seizures at sea. In this case, the chosen corridor becomes the heart of a carefully built kill box, a three-dimensional cage drawn not with fences, but with coordinates. Once the kill box is defined, the question becomes, who stands where? At the center of the plan sits an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, the same type of multi-mission warship the U.S. Navy regularly uses in real counter-drug operations, alongside the Coast Guard. These ships have advanced radar helicopters and enough deck space to act as a mothership for boarding teams. On its stern, a detachment of Navy SEALs prepares to move their job not to sink a fleet, but to break it apart and take people alive. Farther out, a littoral combat ship holds the outer ring, sitting just beyond the reefs, ready to catch any boat that somehow slips past the first layers. Closer to the edges of the corridor, two Coast Guard cutters take position on the likely escape routes. This interagency pattern matches real Caribbean task forces where Coast Guard ships, Navy vessels, and aircraft work together under a unified command to hit smugglers in depth. The cutters bring law enforcement authority, experienced boarding teams, and smaller interceptors that can sprint after anything that tries to break away at the last second. Overhead, a P-8 Poseidon circles high, using its radar and sensors to watch the entire corridor in real time, similar to how these aircraft have supported anti-smuggling and anti-submarine missions in both the Atlantic and Pacific. Closer to the water, an MH-60R Seahawk flies lower and slower, ready to drop in behind the formation and shoot at engines, not people, stripping the fleet of its power one boat at a time. The arrangement looks almost like a net laid flat across the sea. Yet each asset has a precise role. The destroyer anchors the box. The littoral combat ship covers the deep water. The cutters seal the flanks. The P-8 sees everything from above, and the Seahawk reaches out like a moving blade. For viewers used to fast action, it is easy to forget that this kind of trap exists to avoid uncontrolled chaos. If U.S. forces attack while the cartel fleet is still spread out across the open Caribbean, every confrontation becomes more dangerous. A speedboat can charge a cutter force, warning shots, dump cargo near fishing grounds, or provoke a confusing chase at night. When firearms are involved and visibility is low, the risk to crews and even nearby civilians climbs. By contrast, inside the kill box, every factor tilts toward control. The reef corridor slows the water. The limited space narrows contact angles. The overlapping sensors reduce surprises. Even then, nothing is guaranteed, but the odds of stopping the fleet without a massacre increase sharply. That is why commanders are willing to wait, watching their screens as the radar tracks crawl closer to the invisible walls. However, there is still one variable. No map can lock down the human mind. All of this planning assumes that La Corona del Mar will follow its usual route and sail straight into the corridor. If the cartel shifts course at the last minute, dives into deeper water, or hugs a different reef line, the perfect kill box could suddenly open into empty sea. But after all the planning, one question hangs in the dark. Will La Corona del Mar follow the predicted route and step into the trap, or will 98 speedboats vanish into open water and leave the kill box empty? At exactly 2:48 a.m., the radar screens flicker and the formation begins to reveal itself. 98 speedboats, each slicing across the pitch-black Caribbean water at 50 to 60 knots, adjust course, and carry a cargo the size of a small war. What they believe to be a clean run toward U.S. territory is in fact the final act of a prepared trap. Moments earlier, U.S. forces had laid the lines, and now the cartel fleet enters the narrowing sea corridor that leads directly into the kill box. Through the night, a maritime patrol aircraft feeds live video and sensor tracks back to the command center. The movement of the wedge-shaped fleet confirms everything the planners hoped. The cartel is sailing straight into the net. At such speeds, the reaction time for chasing ships is nearly zero. A cutter or destroyer launched late would reach the target only as the engines throttle up, the wake blurs, and the position changes. The only way to succeed is to compel the adversary to enter a confined space where options vanish. By 4:12 a.m., all 98 boats have crossed the reef corridor and are inside the kill box. Picture a narrow rectangle in open water walls of coral just beneath the surface currents that push the boats into predictable paths, and overlapping sensor coverage from above and in the sea. When every boat is inside that rectangle, the tactical advantage flips. The hunter becomes the trap setter. And then comes the most dangerous moment of all. U.S. Navy SEALs already aboard the destroyer and attached fast boats nearby prepare to fast rope into the water, board central vessels, disable engines, and arrest key operators. The helicopters hover above spotlights, carving through mist, while nearby cutters ready intercept craft. This is not a chaotic chase. It is a precision strike executed in layer after layer. At that fog-lit moment, the true gravity of the situation becomes clear. This is not simply a smuggling run gone wrong. It is a naval-style operation by a cartel answered with a military-style response. Failure to stop 98 vessels at once, each capable of carrying dozens of crates of cocaine, could have meant a flood of illicit drugs reaching American shores unchecked. Yet even with the kill box engaged, nothing is simple. The planners have already accounted for speed detection pursuit. But what about unpredictability? What if the fleet turns early, bypasses the corridor, or splits into smaller units? The trap works only when the adversary takes the path you expect. If the cartel deviates, the walls of the elevator open, and the hunters could become prey. Nonetheless, through the quiet hours of the night, the operation holds. The destroyer's radar operators track the boats. The helicopter crew counts hulls in the moonlit troughs. The SEALs wait with suppressed rifles and boarding lines. Every second ticks toward the moment of action. And as the fleet settles inside the kill box, the phase of interception shifts from observation to execution. By mastering geometry, speed, and surprise, U.S. forces transform a high-stakes smuggling corridor into a battlefield zone. The next move will decide whether the cartel's fleet of 98 becomes another footnote or whether it strikes a blow that would reach far beyond the Caribbean horizon. The fleet is finally trapped, but one question hovers in the darkness. Once the kill box closes, how will U.S. forces strike 98 boats moving at full speed without turning the corridor into a massacre? Aboard the destroyer, an MH-60R Seahawk dips low, its infrared camera lighting up hulls in the night. Marksmen lock on. The first engines explode in sparks, and flame disabled before crews can react. Meanwhile, Navy SEALs fast rope into the center of the formation light, fast boats darting alongside the trapped speedboats. Stun grenades bounce off hulls. Precision rounds silence exhausts and intercept craft from Coast Guard cutters, block every possible escape path. The mission's priority is not to destroy, but to disable and capture a tactical choice that turns speedboats into silent hulks and crews into arrestees. The strategy highlights a simple truth. In maritime interdictions, U.S. forces aim first to stop, not kill, because arresting smugglers yields intelligence and disrupts networks far more than sinking vessels alone. In this operation, the payoff is staggering. 41 boats are disabled, 39 captured intact, and the remaining 18 sunk or abandoned. Together, they hold over 6,000 pounds of cocaine, plus sophisticated communications gear, navigation devices, and satellite phones, a haul that underscores the seriousness of the threat. Real-world interdictions show seizures in the thousands of pounds, and here the scale and coordination push the limits of what maritime forces can do. Those engines did not just power fast boats. They powered a cartel's ambition, steering hundreds of millions of dollars in illicit drugs toward U.S. shores. The U.S. response shows how modern naval air and law enforcement assets can integrate in darkness at speed and with surgical precision. The destroyer provides the anchor. The helicopter and radar assets provide the eyes. The cutters and boarding teams provide the hand that closes the grip. When the fleet enters the kill box, the net snaps. Yet the most crucial moment comes after the physical capture, when intelligence teams begin unpacking the machines, the logs, the communications chatter hidden in those speedboats. Each device offers a key to larger networks. As the operation winds down and daylight creeps into the Caribbean horizon, planners think, we have stopped 98 boats. But what lies behind them? It is the moment of transition from chase to investigation. The question then becomes not simply who will face arrest, but what organization enabled this fleet, what routes they used, and how deep the corruption ran. In the coming hours, the Federal Bureau of Investigation will reveal that this was not a one-off show of force. It was exposure of a $100 million cocaine empire. For the men and women who locked down the kill box, the victory is immediate, and the implications far-reaching. The seas are no longer a free highway for smugglers, and the message is clear. When you build a fleet to slip through the night, U.S. forces will build a trap to lock you in it. When U.S. forces board the last of the speedboats and dusk settles over the Caribbean corridor, the mode of action shifts instantly from interception to investigation. Agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation and allied agencies pore over satellite logs, radio chatter, and smuggled devices recovered from the seized hulls. A far broader picture emerges. The operation at sea has exposed a vast transnational network moving not just drugs, but cash vessels and shell companies across oceans. The FBI's counter-organized crime unit defines these transnational criminal organizations as those that span borders, traffic narcotics, and launder money in an interconnected web. In this case, the cartel known as La Corona del Mar has built more than a fleet. It has created a cargo logistics empire operating with the efficiency of a corporate supply chain. Evidence reveals that this network is structured almost like a private courier service for cocaine. Boats run weekly routes. Launches are timed to tides and currents. Crews train for stealth insertion. Behind them, finance and logistics cells hold vaults of cash. Front companies rent yard space to refurbish composite hull speedboats. Offshore shell corporations undercut tax laws and mask payments. Intelligence articles note that drug trafficking organizations have evolved into business-like entities using modern supply chain logic and money laundering techniques to reduce risk. La Corona del Mar's system functions similarly to digital platforms such as Uber or DoorDash, but for illicit cargo. Coordinates are sent, arrival windows are calculated, tracking signals are monitored, payments are dispersed upon receipt. Such a system turns individual acts of smuggling into a regular industrial operation with predictable throughput and scale. Had the U.S. Killbox operation not succeeded, reality likely would have looked very different. Some 6,000 pounds of cocaine, enough to flood markets and bolster profits well into 9 figures, were aboard those 98 boats headed toward U.S. shores. Contemporary reports from the Coast Guard and other federal agencies show that each ton of cocaine carries street value potential of tens of millions of dollars once it enters domestic distribution chains. Without the trap in the narrow reef corridor, the fleet could have sailed past detection-dispersed cargo and vanished into local networks. Instead, by trapping the fleet and capturing discrete elements, the United States disrupted not just a load, but an entire method and supply chain logic. This moment marks a turning point. The action at sea reveals that intelligence and maritime forces are no longer facing isolated runs, but industrial-scale narcotics logistics. The challenge is no longer a single boat, but a fleet. No longer a hidden stash, but an open channel of global commerce built on violence and corruption. Analysts inside the FBI now voice concerns that the key to defeating such networks lies in understanding commerce-level operations. Financial flows, front companies, and digital scheduling, not just the vessels themselves. The implication for U.S. national security is profound. When criminal enterprises adopt business-like efficiency, they begin to rival legitimate logistics systems, challenge border controls, and embed themselves in local economies. And so, the twist emerges. This is not merely a dramatic interdiction at sea. It is the unraveling of a multi-million-dollar empire. From the deck of the destroyer to the wallets of shell companies, the United States discovers that the 98 speedboats were only the visible edge of a far deeper operation. But the key revelation comes only at the end of the night. More important than the tonnage seized is the proof that the United States must track the architecture behind the smuggling. Because once the architecture is known, future operations can be anticipated, disrupted, and shut down entirely. If unraveling the $100 million empire exposes how deep the network runs, what does this entire operation ultimately reveal about the future of America's fight on the world's oceans? As the sun finally rises over the Caribbean corridor, the scale of what has unfolded becomes impossible to ignore. The cartel has advanced with the discipline of a small naval force deploying a swarm of high-speed boats instead of a single vessel. A tactic that mirrors the evolution of real trafficking operations documented in U.S. maritime interdictions, where criminals increasingly rely on fast, low-profile craft to outrun patrols. In response, the United States pulls multiple agencies into one synchronized strike. Navy crews, SEAL teams, Coast Guard cutters, and FBI investigators work as a single machine, proving that modern interdiction is no longer just a chase. It is a coordinated battle across sea, air, and intelligence networks. The Killbox they built in the reef corridor embodies a core principle long emphasized in U.S. maritime strategy: win before the first shot is fired. By shaping the battlefield, predicting movement, and forcing the cartel fleet into a confined space, U.S. forces flipped the odds. Instead of confronting 98 speedboats scattered across open water, they face a fleet trapped in a narrow window, where skill, technology, and planning hold the advantage. Yet the larger message extends beyond this one fight. The threats facing the United States are changing shape. They no longer arrive only in hidden compartments or deep-diving submersibles, but in coordinated swarms designed to overwhelm sensors and surprise patrols. What has not changed is America's ability to adapt, combining military power, high-tech surveillance, and interagency cooperation to stay ahead on the world's most contested waters. And that leaves us with one final question. As cartels evolve, what new tricks will they deploy to slip past US radar? Share your thoughts below. And if you want to dive deeper into the secrets shaping modern warfare, remember to subscribe to Titan Navy so you never miss the next breakthrough.